Yo, what up? This is D Knight, and you're listening to the Pardon the Insurrection podcast. We are back with another Pocket Pardon episode for you today. The results from the South Carolina Republican primary are in. The media has gone totally off the rails. MAGA is insane as per the usual. But before we get to all of that, let's give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Sheets and Giggles. Grab you some damn sheets from sheetsandgiggles.com because they are the best things you will ever sleep under or on top of in your life. And that includes your husband or your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your side piece or your mistress. You know, no judgment here. I don't care how y'all kick it as long as you getting it on some sheets from sheetsandgiggles.com. And if you would like a little discount, you can check out the description for a link courtesy of Pardon Pod. Also, our co-hosts have written a couple of books, so feel free to grab a copy of those. Links are also in the description. No pressure though. Biden does have the economy humming, but we ain't asking you to go broke to support the podcast. On to the news. As of yesterday, we got the results of the Republican primary in South Carolina, and whoop-de-doo, surprise, surprise, Donald Trump was victorious over his challenger and former employee, Nikki Haley. That's Nikki with 3 Ks. In case you forgot that time that she got on national TV and told us that the cause of the Civil War wasn't slavery. It was absolutely wild. Like, it's incredible that she performed that well, given those comments. But hey, I guess when you're going up against Trump, like, what's a small bit of rewriting history in favor of racism by comparison? Normally shit like that would sink anyone's presidential campaign, but look, when you're a Republican, you can do anything and people will still vote for you. You can commit endless amounts of fraud. Well, I guess not endless. We have an actual figure on that amount of fraud. It's currently up to $464 million in New York. You know, or you can commit espionage by stealing lots of classified documents and hiding them from the government and, you know, having them disappear to potentially who knows where. You can also be found liable for sexual assault, or as Trump would put it, like literally grabbing someone by the pussy, which did of course happen in New York again. Let's get to a couple of noteworthy numbers here. So Trump ended up getting around 60% of the vote in North Carolina, with Nikki Haley ending up with around 39.5%. So I guess the media calling that an overwhelming and decisive victory in South Carolina could be construed as somewhat accurate until you take the time to realize that President Biden won the South Carolina Democratic primary with something like 96% of the vote. 96%. That's an insanely crushing number when you compare that to the 60% that Trump just got in South Carolina. Given that Trump is running as though he's the incumbent here, given that he did serve 4 years in the White House, the fact that the media isn't spending more time talking about just how weak he is as a potential candidate is beyond insane. Like, imagine a world where 40% of the Democratic Party was voting against Joe Biden. You'd never hear the fucking end of it. Never. It would never go away. It would never stop. The media would never, it'd be endless articles. And you know this because, what was it, Axios the other day wrote this story with the headline about, I don't know, something about donors or voters being concerned that Joe Biden uses note cards. The article was written by a motherfucker who uses note cards. Yeah, and if you think that's wild, guess what Axios didn't cover? So, Trump was at a rally this weekend where he was reading from note cards about the support from his various family members, and he went on to name them Melania, Don Jr., Ivanka, even Laura Trump. Guess who we forgot? Eric. Even reading from the note cards, he can't remember the names of his family members. Axios didn't write an article about that. No, they did not. But that's okay. That's why I'm here to point out the ridiculous nonsense that the media continues to engage in that just makes them look totally, I don't know, either incompetent or complicit in the potential ending of our democracy. I am hoping that they'll eventually get it together. My expectations are low. Anyway, back to the South Carolina primary. So, one other notable number, or at least notable in the grand scheme of things, is that before the primary, Trump was polling at somewhere around 65 to 70%, with Nikki Haley polling around 30%. If you look at the actual results, as it turns out, Trump got significantly less than that, and Haley outperformed the polling by nearly 10 percentage points. And while it's quite possible that there's no need to read too far into that, you could also argue that the polling isn't picking up on some of Trump's actual weaknesses and how they play out in actual elections when people have the opportunity to vote. Right, so we all look at Donald Trump, or at least in the context of all of the things surrounding Trump, all of these indictments, the failure to fundraise for the Republican Party, like the vote share that Biden is getting in the Democratic primary versus what Trump is getting in the Republican primary, and these polls that, at least over the past year and a half or so, have showed Republicans to be stronger than they actually are in reality, is that the polling methodology might be possibly flawed, and it's favoring Trump in the polls, giving him a margin that his support doesn't actually warrant. You know, TLDR, he's not nearly as popular as the polling suggests, and that's, you know, that comes to bear every time people have the opportunity to turn out and vote. But I think one of the ways in which that's super dangerous is that I believe the only thing that's keeping Trump afloat is this idea among Republicans that Trump still has the possibility of beating Biden, right? So you're a Republican voter. You know all this crazy shit is going on with Trump. On Earth One, where people operate with common sense, they look at this and be like, damn, we have to get another candidate. This is insane. Like, no presidential candidate could possibly win under these circumstances. Except for, you have these polls out here that make it appear as though Trump is in a competitive race with Biden. Then you don't have any real incentive as a Trump supporter to vote for a different candidate because you think that Trump is electable. Now, whether that is reality is beside the point. What matters is people's opinions of Trump's electability insofar as conservative voters and conservative donors. Because if you just look at what happened to Nikki Haley with her loss in South Carolina, you know, as embarrassing as it is to lose in your home state, especially like a state where you used to be governor. Like upon her loss in South Carolina, it appears as though the Koch brothers have pulled out of Nikki Haley and her campaign. Sorry for the phrasing there. I don't know what happened. But because it appears as though Haley has no chance of beating Trump, the money has stopped flowing. Well, what would happen if it appears as though Trump has no chance of beating Biden, right? So the wealthy donors would eventually decide that they would be better off not throwing their money away on a candidate that they know is going to lose in a presidential election, or even a primary in this particular instance, right? But that these polls have this, what seems to be a Trump favoring bias baked into the mix, baked into the equation. Like, there is no incentive for people to not throw their vote and their money away on this dude. Like, I think, and the thing is like, if his support collapsed enough so that it appears as though the 2024 election, the presidential election, the general election wouldn't be competitive, his support in the primary would tank. So it's like the polls are creating this self-fulfilling prophecy where Trump may actually not be electable, but because the polls say otherwise, he continues to receive more support from his cohorts in the Republican Party or the Republican donor class than he should otherwise. And then he gets to use that money to fund his GOP primary campaign, more so than Nikki Haley, which continues to rally support behind him from voters that he probably shouldn't warn otherwise. It's very fucking wild. I had predicted at like the end of 2022 that we would eventually come to see a civil war inside the Republican Party, like the diehard Trumpers versus the people who want a candidate that can win. Well, the reason we haven't gotten that civil war is because the polls appear to be lying to people. And so people are like, Trump supporters are just complacent. They're complacent with their candidate, even though there's all this real world data that suggests Trump is not only going to lose in 2024, but the party's going to get fucking hammered. And there's one exit poll in particular from South Carolina that suggests that Trump is really in danger of getting blown out in 2024. And that is the fact that a significant portion of Nikki Haley's supporters are at this point never Trumpers. Like, even if Trump wins the nomination, a significant portion of them, forget the exact number, are never going to vote for Trump. Well, that's a huge fucking problem. Why? Because if you just go back to 2020, Trump lost the popular vote by 7 million votes. That's a fucking massive landslide victory for President Biden. But even though it's the case that Biden won by a significant margin in the popular vote, in a handful of swing states that could have tipped the election, Trump only lost by like less than 100,000 votes. Right? Well, in those swing states where you might have more moderate Republicans who might typically be closer to voting for Nikki Haley than voting for Trump in a Republican primary, like, all it takes for Trump to lose in a massive fashion is for, 3, 4, 5% of Nikki Haley supporters to decide that there's no way they're going to vote for Trump. Now, that sounds like a tiny number, right? She didn't even get half the support in the primary in South Carolina. So let's just say 40% of Republicans support Nikki Haley. And let's say a mere 5% of Nikki Haley supporters will refuse to vote for Trump in the 2024 election. Right? So 10% of 40% is 4%. And then, half that to get to 5% is 2%. So let's say 2% of Republican voters all across the nation refuse to vote for Trump because Nikki Haley has given them the opportunity to voice their displeasure, and they've come to the conclusion that Trump shouldn't be president, whatever the circumstances may be. They're not going to vote for him. So let's say it's Michigan. The vote is split between Democrats and Republicans in Michigan, 50-50. 50% of Michigan voters choose Democrats up and down the ballot. 50% of Republican voters choose Republicans up and down the ballot, except for 2% of Republican voters at the top of the ticket vote for Joe Biden. It is game, set, match at that point. There's no way that Trump can make up losing 2% of his base in swing states that he just lost in the 2020 election, in a world where he doesn't have the power of incumbency anymore. And also, just like from a practical matter, Trump and the entire Republican Party are suffering from like a cash shortage. Like, the entire party is broke. And I don't like Trump's PACs are broke. I mean, they're not like flat broke, but like it is in terms of like cash on hand, they're in the teens as far as millions of dollars. Like, between Biden, the DNC, and Biden's PACs, they're over 120 million cash on hand. That's a massive fucking advantage. Not to mention this other issue that we're going to get to momentarily. You know, the fact that Trump personally might be broke here. But again, we'll save that for just a moment. So even in a race that might normally be 50-50 splits between Trump and Biden, Trump losing 2% of support from his own base is doomsday. It is a doomsday scenario because it makes Biden unbeatable in swing states that are close. And I think over the course of the next few weeks, you're going to see a lot more panic from the Republican Party, the Republican establishment, the people who look at the fucking numbers and the data and pull it together to try and figure out what's the path to victory here. And this, despite the polling that shows a competitive race between Trump and Biden, that's keeping Trump afloat, that could also lead to a Republican civil war. And this is why you don't need anybody to primary Biden for all those idiots out there that continue to suggest somehow that Biden is in trouble here. It's really Trump that's in trouble. And as long as Nikki Haley continues to stay in the race and give like conservative voters who aren't necessarily sold on a second Trump administration the opportunity to psychologically come to the conclusion that it's okay to not vote for Trump, the worse off his chances get. And if somehow, like, and we forget this, but like, Trump is going on trial here for criminal charges in New York in less than a month. It's fucking bananas. like no one's even talking about it. It's so wild. Like, how do you not... there's a trial, a criminal trial for the leading Republican candidate in 2024 taking place, or at least the jury selection begins in less than 30 days. And no one in the news media is fucking talking about it. It's you can't make it up. Can't make it up. So if there happens to be a conviction in that case, and I'm not entirely sure how many weeks the trial will take place, but it will likely be in a situation where, as far as delegates go, Trump will have won enough on Super Tuesday to lock up the nomination, and there's no rules whatsoever in the DNC or in the RNC rather that can prevent him from becoming the nominee. So there may be a situation where Trump is locked in, but then he's criminally convicted. And then that 2% of the Trump base that refuses to vote for Trump no matter what, that turns into 5 or 10 or 15% or some ridiculous number where, like, not only is Trump unelectable, but he might take the entire party in states that Republicans normally win. You know, and I don't want to get you guys' hopes up. Like, I'm not telling you it's a guarantee that that'll happen, but like, there is that possibility that we're sitting there in the summer with at least one Trump criminal conviction. He's polling in the 30% range as far as like the 2024 general election. That's insurmountable. You remember that Falcons Super Bowl where they had like a 28-3 lead over the New England Patriots and Tom Brady? And Tom Brady managed to come back from that. Well, like being down like 30% to 60 whatever in favor of Biden, like that's like a 58-3 lead at halftime. Nobody can come back from that. I mean, like at that point, like the Republican plan to win, it would have to be assassinate Joe Biden, because that's like that's the only possible way. It's the only possible way for them to come back. But let's say somehow like voters get the idea that, hey, Trump is unelectable. Super Tuesday, we can still vote for Haley. They can still, you know, select another candidate to be their nominee. The scenario in that case is that the same way that a percentage of Haley's voters have decided that there's no way, shape, form, or fashion in which they will cast their vote for Trump in the presidential election. Well, there's an even larger percentage of Trump loyalists who just won't show up to the ballot box in November. Again, another scenario that not only spells doom for Trump in terms of the possibility of winning the 2024 election, but it portends doom for the entire party down ballot. Because if Trump's not on the ballot in 2024 for whatever reason, like say the Supreme Court has tricked us and they're actually going to look at the Constitution and read the literal text and decide that Trump is disqualified, or somehow Haley pulls off the nomination, beats Trump, and he's not on the ticket, it's a lot of mad Republicans out there who ain't gonna vote for nobody. Not only are they not gonna vote for whoever the nominee is, whether that be Haley or someone else, they ain't gonna vote, period. And there's a lot of governors, a lot of state legislatures, a lot of local officials who are relying on that Trump boost to help put them over the top, that they won't get if 5, 10, 20% of Republican voters decide to just hang it up in 2024 and that they're not voting. Yeah, it's not the most likely scenario, but there's definitely a real possibility. And I say all that to say this, like, the idea that the media is out here suggesting that Biden has problems is fucking bananas. Fuck it. There is no scenario where Biden ain't the nominee that doesn't involve Republicans committing some kind of fucking crime. Because, of course, they're likely to commit a number of crimes. They'll literally do anything to try and win at this point, I would imagine. I mean, they've committed a number of crimes previously, right? And I think, like, one of the major failings, and look, you guys know me, I am typically, if not pro Merrick Garland, I at least have an explanation for the things that you might typically consider to be a Merrick Garland failing. However, the biggest mistake I think Garland made was not immediately coming into office and indicting Trump for obstruction of justice, as was detailed in the Mueller report, because I think that was a slam dunk case, especially after Trump attempted to overthrow the United States government on January 6th. Like, no jury at that point was going to look at those charges and the evidence against him and let him off the hook. Because, I mean, the charges were pretty fucking clear cut. He did everything possible to try and obstruct the Mueller investigation while he was president. And Mueller, listed out the potential crimes for you and was like, here you go. It's like a draft indictment. Where you guys at? And this isn't just to get Trump out of the way. I think the lesson Republicans learned was like, hey, we can engage in all these fucking shenanigans that are probably illegal and there ain't gonna be no consequences. So why would we stop? And this is how you end up with what is potentially a Russian intelligence operation to smear Joe Biden, leading to an impeachment vote by Republicans in the House. Because, obviously, the information that they were relying on was not accurate, was not actual evidence. It was disinformation created by Russian intelligence services. And they decided that they were willing to take the risk of appearing as though they were working with Russia again to rig yet another election. They're willing to take that risk because nobody went to jail for it the first time. Or at least, I take that back. Because Mueller did indict a significant number of people, which is also a thing that people seem to leave out. Mueller indicted people, actually sent people to jail, and Trump obstructed that investigation for those people who would be like, well, Mueller didn't arrest anybody, so it wasn't obstruction. If more people had gone to prison, including a number of Trump's co-conspirators, Republicans wouldn't be out here doing this wild, largely illegal shit now. And then it's definitely the case that I guess It's going to end up being an entire podcast in and of itself. But it's definitely the case that if Jack Smith had already indicted members of Congress for their role in the fake elector plot, like Republicans wouldn't be out here trying to launder Russian disinformation to the public in an attempt to remove a sitting president as part of like a Russian intelligence operation. They just wouldn't be doing it. They wouldn't want to take them chances. But again, as I've said before, like I totally understand what Smith is doing, right? You know, you want to make sure this Trump trial goes off before the election without a hitch. And the only way you can do that is to make sure the case is as streamlined as possible, and involving a significant amount of his co-conspirators, especially as members of Congress, would just make the case more complicated. It'd make like all the pre-trial motions and such overwhelming as far as having the trial proceed as scheduled. Like I see what he was doing. But also, man, like sometimes you just gotta look at the potential consequences of doing the right thing. Like all of these fuckers deserve to be facing charges, and like the idea that maybe we won't get the trial before the election because you indicted too many people, like so be it, dude. Like, cause you only indicted Trump, in that case might not even make it to trial if there's, you know, any more of a significant delay. Like the trial's already been postponed temporarily as it is. It's definitely not going to take place in March. And at this rate, you know, it likely won't even take place in May at the rate it's going. We still haven't gotten a ruling from the Supreme Court on whether or not they're going to take up Trump's immunity claim, the one where the DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Trump. Like we don't have any news on that so far. So as long as that's the case, everything in DC is stayed. It's just put on hold indefinitely until we get something out of the Supreme Court. Now, of course, I don't think the Supreme Court is going to do him any favors on the immunity case, but that's like a different conversation for another day. But we still need that to take place before Chutkin can get back to making moves and setting schedules and getting this thing back on track. And she's already said that it was going to take at least 7 months to let Trump's defense team prepare. Trump's team only had 5 months to prepare up until this most recent delay, which means still have 2 more months on the clock, and that clock won't start ticking again until we hear from the Supreme Court. So even with that potential delay and his victory in South Carolina, how well are things actually going for Trump? Well, not great, guys. Well, Judge Ngorn has ruled that the enforcement proceedings against Trump for the $464 million at this point, because the interest keeps accruing daily. There's like a Trump tracker, a Trump tracker available online that calculates that interest in real time. If you'd like to check that out, I think it's TrumpDebtCounter.com. It's fucking hilarious. Every time I'm feeling down or despondent, I just click that thing, open it up, and see that the numbers continue to the dollar amount continues to go up and up every single day, and that perks me right on up. Yeah, so Ngorn has ruled that the collection on that judgment can begin within the next 30 days. And Trump is having some trouble coming up with the funds. I know all of his supporters said he was going to appeal, but like I said, or as a number of people have pointed out, to do that, he'll either have to secure a bond, which just seems fucking impossible, or he'll have to put the money in escrow up front, you know, along with whatever the prejudgment interest will be. And I don't think he's got it. And the reason I don't believe that is because his previous judgment in the E. Jean Carroll case, where she was awarded $83 million, he ain't able to come up with that. He's in court right now trying to fight that ruling. And like, hey man, can you give me like another 30 days? I don't think he's got the money, guys. Because if he can't come up with $83 million, he definitely can't come up with $464 million. And I feel like this is the only podcast where it's even remotely mentioned, but how is Trump supposed to run a presidential campaign with no money? There is no campaign in modern history that's been ran in a presidential election cycle with no money. And there's a reason for that. And that concludes this episode of Pardon the Insurrection.